Welcome, Gino. Thanks for coming. You made quorum for us, sir. Thank you very much. Very important for this meeting. Okay. The meeting is now called to order. Has the roll call been taken?
The roll has been taken.
Okay, thank you. I just want to go over the rules of procedure for today's meeting. We'll briefly begin by going over some procedural rules, okay? The meeting is held in hybrid format in accordance with Article 18 of the procedural bylaw. Staff and delegates participating virtually are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee as well. All cameras for virtual committee members shall remain on to ensure a quorum. The one camera must be on. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair determines the results of the vote. In the event of a corrections or connection or service interruption, we'll wait 15 minutes before we have to dismiss the meeting. Members of the task force, are there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We had one delegation. Is that not the case now? Doesn't seem to be the case.
I don't see the delegation.
Okay, we had a delegation on our listing, but this delegation has not appeared, so it must have changed to another time. Because Councilor School didn't make clear. So I don't have to read the rule before the hearing of delegations. So we have a presentation. There's one presentation today. And as a presentation today, encompasses a lot of materials. With no objection from the mover, I'd like to waive the rules 15.6, so we will be on the 10-minute time limit. Moved by Councilor Scully, seconded by Councilor Caputo. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Objections? I ask Joshua to introduce Paul Lowe's from SLG and Planning and Design. Welcome by the presentation. Did I miss anything there? Good. Okay. Good.
So good afternoon, Chair and members of the task force. My name is Joshua Scram. I'm a senior long-range planner with the City of Brantford and lead on the city's zoning bylaw project. Joining me today, I have lead project consultant and principal planner from SGL, Paul Lowe's. So we're here today to share an update on the new zoning bylaw project and the remaining schedule. Right, thank you. So just a quick review of the agenda. We'll start by briefly reviewing the zoning bylaw project and the various phases. Then we'll discuss the consultation program that transpired from January to May of this year, then review some of the key changes and considerations that were made to that first draft that was released back in December of last year, and then conclude with next steps and project schedule. Perfect. So just a quick review. Phase 1 and phase 2, really, these are, focused on setting the stage for the overall project, the work plan, data collection, communication. Then we get into phase 3. This is the discussion papers, really reviewing key topics that provided really the prelim recommendations to inform the format and content of the new zoning bylaw. Then we get into phase 4, which is the strategic directions report, really forming the blueprint that informed phase 5, which is the first draft of the zoning bylaw, which was released for public review and comment on December 4th of last year. And then staff requested public comments by the end of January so that they could be considered for the next draft. So this brings us to phase 6. Really excited to be at this stage in the project. This is the preparation of the final comprehensive zoning bylaw. So since the end of January 2024 and that commenting period, planning staff and the consulting team continue to receive feedback from members of council, residents, and stakeholders looking to really engage and provide additional feedback on the draft zoning bylaw. So staff modified project timelines to create additional opportunities for information sharing and engagement to address additional questions and comments. So we get into, the result of various requests for additional opportunities for that information and education on the zoning bylaw. Planning staff and the project team advanced several opportunities for public engagement and information sharing. Actually, the two that are on the screen right now, a feather in the cap of the task force, council workshops. I think this was a really great item. Staff met with the mayor and members of council on a ward by ward basis to review the draft zoning bylaw, the interactive mapping, which is a new and very useful tool, and also discuss proposed zoning and issues within each of the 5 wards, which was great. So, the project teams believes this was also a great opportunity for information sharing and collaboration between staff and council. And then we have the citywide mailouts. So I included some snippets of the mailout that occurred, but really throughout March and April of this year, property owners, tenants, business owners, they were really all notified through post mail about the new draft zoning bylaw. And through postcards and utility bill inserts. I think we're around just over 32,000 mailouts to homes and businesses. And they were given information about the new zoning bylaw, the online mapping tools. And we also had the ongoing rollout of social media advertising, right? So through the various city accounts, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter. These were again utilized to promote project awareness and engagement within the community. And then again, as part of that growing interest in the zoning bylaw project throughout Q1 and Q2 of this year, staff continued to engage with community groups and agencies, some of which here are on the screen. But again, these are really great opportunities, one for education and information sharing, but also to receive feedback on the zoning bylaw. We'll talk about the comments that we received on the zoning bylaw. But one of the things that we found was, there's obviously this aspect of truthing, right? And, whether it's a site visit or if it's from a property owner, there might be something that has changed on a site. So we're reviewing it from a high level, maybe aerials. So maybe this is, okay, we're going to go out and, do a site visit, or we're going to talk with residents about, that on the ground truthing. And then we also had the additional consultation that occurred through the intensification corridor zone open house. So in April, a public open house was held at City Hall to share additional information, specifically focused on the new intensification corridor zone. And really the intent of this, this open house was for the project team to meet with property owners and residents located within or in close proximity to the IC zone. And really, information was displayed at different stations throughout council chambers, and visual examples really provided a potential for different development scenarios under the proposed zoning. So, later in the presentation, we'll discuss how feedback from the open house and the meeting with various residents and stakeholder groups, staff were able to make refinements to the intensification corridor zone, and, a lot of the good responses and feedback that we received at that open house. So as mentioned, when we're talking about the changes and considerations that are made to the draft zoning bylaw, as of May 1st of this year, staff received over 100 submitted comments on the draft zoning bylaw. A quick summary of those comments are provided here, right? So if we're talking about definitions and permitted uses, maybe we included some additional definitions that weren't incorporated, permitted uses, looking at those as well. Select zone provisions, so the requests for reductions in setbacks, also reductions in maybe parking. On the flip side, people looking to potentially have zones increase in height or reduces in height, reductions in height. Additional site specifics. So this is a big one, and we'll talk about key changes in the zoning bylaw. The addition of site specifics, these were not included in the first draft. And one of the things that we heard through the commenting period was, we heard from different residents or property owners who wanted to see the current site specifics under zoning bylaw 160-90 carried forward. So, although they weren't released, it was a good reminder to us to make sure we're looking at all the site specifics, and Paul and his team did a really thorough job of all, I think it's 650 site specifics in terms of determining what was, necessary and should be carried forward, maybe what was redundant up against the new zoning bylaw. Then we get into formatting errors and graphics. So, kind of the housekeeping items. Scheduling it, the schedules and interactive mapping. In reviewing the schedules, one of the things that we've really talked about, whether it was the official plan review process and that new document that got approval in the fall of 2021. We have schedules in the zoning bylaw right now that are somewhat redundant. They reference the official plan appendices, so there's opportunities to remove those, right, and not have those overlapping carbon copies of the same map. And then interactive mapping. So with Lisa's help here, what I'll do is just share, the interactive mapping, but what we've done is we've layered the updates on top of it so you can see where, all the changes have occurred. So with the assistance of our planning technicians, we've been able to map out all those changes and show them, right? So I think that it's a nice visual comparison for the task force to see here. Just drag that across there. Grab this guy. Perfect. Thanks. So as you can see, for those that are familiar with the interactive mapping, really what we have here is we have Schedule A of the new zoning bylaw, lots of color, really exciting new tool for us. But you can also see in certain areas where we have this black hatching line, and all that black hatching line is to indicate is that a change has occurred here. So if we're talking about, you know, a property down here in Golfdale, one of the comments we heard was we had advanced neighborhood low-rise provisions, which were actually a lot smaller than what these lots were. So we heard multiple comments were submitted. So we're able to review that. But so this hatching just indicates that a change has occurred. We zoom over to even the intensification corridor. You know, there's been some refinements to the provisions for this zone as well. But yeah, at a macro level, when you look at Schedule A, you can really see those changes and where they've been identified, and you know, speaks to all the work that's been done throughout Q1 and Q2 of this year. So we'll flip back to the presentation now. Bring this mouse over here.
Or do we able to use both screens next time, where you can move the screen to the side?
From a technology perspective, I can reach out to
For next
IT.
time, next time.
Yeah, yeah, I'll have some conversations with
I
IT
can do that.
and see if that's something that's feasible.
Okay, no, that's okay. Just a thought for going forward, so that we don't lose the members of the committee. There you go.
Okay. Thanks. So then, yeah, in addition, we have ground truthing. So I kind of touched on that, right? Reviewing aerial imagery, site visits, talking with members of the public to better understand current site conditions and the appropriate zone categorizations. So that was a really key component. And then we have the official plan conformity. So identifying required official plan amendments, and, you know, continuing to identify these small tweaks. So really identifying the required OP amendments to ensure the proposed zoning aligns with updated provincial policy, best practice, and recent development trends within the city of Brantford as well. Although 2021 is not that far away, things do change, and in the planning world, things seem to be evolving all the time, right? So really important. So in terms of key changes and considerations that I want to identify, the first being site-specific exemptions. So not included in that first draft that was released December 4th, we have the site specifics. So these are, you know, as I'd mentioned, there's over close to 650 current site exemptions and special provisions in the existing zoning bylaws. And really Paul and his team started with that foundation and put those against the provisions of the new zoning bylaw. So alongside our review, you know, we received comments from the public, really determining what site specifics need to be carried forward and remain relevant, and those that are no longer needed. So that's a big component and a key change. Staff are, you know, really happy to have a comprehensive, complete zoning bylaw now. And, you know, over the course of July and August, when this document goes out for review, we'll probably see, you know, some comments on those site specifics. So the next is developing in the expansion lands and that component. So when we're talking about development in the expansion lands, we're often looking to our new zoning bylaw and the Greenfield neighborhood low-rise zone. So in terms of, you know, permitting low-rise, multiple unit dwellings across the residential areas within the city of Brantford, planning staff and the project team really created one set of provisions that are contemporary and based on comparative municipal review, development trends, and applications of, you know, the application of planning principles specific to the context of Brantford. So I think when we're talking about, you know, the feedback that we received and key changes for this area, the development zone and the GNLR zone, we did get a lot of feedback from the development community requesting reductions in height or maybe setbacks or coverage. And so, you know, really good for us to have that feedback. And one of the really great things that our team was able to do during the process was actually we were able to go out to comparative municipalities and look at, you know, greenfield development in other areas and take some positives, and then also identify some things that we wanted to change in the context of Brantford. So I think it was really important for us, while receiving these comments from other developers, also to, you know, have a conversation with Paul and his team about what the right fit was for provisions specifically in Brantford. And then we have reviewing the strategic growth areas. So really the city of Brantford's official plan identifies intensification corridors along key arterial roads. They really function as the connective spines connecting, you know, are key destinations to surrounding neighborhoods, and it really aligns with the official plan. Our new intensification corridor zone permits that broad range of commercial and residential uses in mid and high-rise development. So after reviewing submitted comments, conducting our intensification corridor open house, and chatting with different residents and stakeholders, we revised the IC zone. And I highlight a few there. So maximum building heights along Erie Ave changed from 6 to 4. Minimum building heights for non-residential uses in the IC zone changed from 3 to 1 story. We also did some refinements to the IC boundaries. There were some areas that we identified that, were probably better situated as neighborhood low rise as opposed to being in the IC zone. And then also refinements to areas that are zoned as pedestrian promenade, right? So those pedestrian promenade really requires ground floor commercial uses, anywhere where we have this ICPP. So we reviewed those citywide and made refinements. So in terms of next steps, the updated draft zoning bylaw will be released next week, along with the comment and response matrix. Basically, the comment and response matrix will identify all the comments that were submitted and the response to the comment. Whether we're reviewing it, identifying great catch, we've identified a change, or, we reviewed this against other provisions and it's going to remain the same. Really addressing each of the comments that were provided and formalizing a response. So that will be released alongside the document next week. A statutory public meeting will then be held at a special committee of the whole, planning and admin, in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act in September. And then following that stat meeting, the project team will make any final revisions to the draft zoning bylaw as necessary before presenting a final version of the new comprehensive zoning bylaw for approval at the September council meeting. And then, we also recommend holding a special committee of the whole. And basically this, includes all members of council, ensures there's adequate time for delegations and also council discussion. And then the last component is really that final stage, and something I think we're aware of, includes the potential for appeals, right, to the OLT. So if there's appeals against the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw, then planning staff and the consulting team would participate in an OLT process, which could include a hearing or a mediation. So with that, all that information, I'll open it up for comments and questions alongside Paul here.
I'll have to take that off the screen so I can see Councilor Caputo. Okay, questions from the committee? Councilor Scully.
I have a few questions. And thank you for the overview. It was terrific, and watching this process go on has been quite amusing. I'm enjoying watching how our brains are working and how we're coming to the final product. But I do have a few questions. So where am I? Got a lot here. Pertaining to accessory buildings, is that's touched on in here, I'm assuming. So accessory buildings and the definitions of accessory buildings. I've had a few people in my ward call me to say that neighbors have craned like sea cans into their backyard. And because they're not like permanent, and then some people from the city have gone out and said, well, if you throw some siding on there, it's a shed and it's fine. So as far as definition goes, is this like a trend we can expect to see more of? And should we be addressing that, like sea cans and shipping containers, as being used as accessory buildings, and where they fall in there? Are they permanent? Are they not permanent? Do we need permits for that? Because technically they're not permanent, I suppose. So I just thought I'd leave that with you. And I'm sure we'll address it.
We can talk about what
Sure,
what the
yeah.
bylaw says right now.
Yeah.
It says
Yeah.
for shipping containers, you're only permitted to have a shipping container for 30 days for basically moving purposes. Load it up, move it out. You can have it for 30 days on your property. So somebody is not supposed to crane in multiple
Yeah.
shipping containers in their rear yard. That is not permitted.
And that's under the current zoning bylaw as well, 160-90.
I understand.
So certainly the comment about, because we had this conversation internally with staff about shipping containers and how they're used, and the opportunity to alter them and change them. I think a lot of work goes into that in terms of what would actually need to be done. But yeah, as Paul's saying, it's 30 days, right? So that's the time frame. So if it's there, then it wouldn't conform to the bylaw.
Yeah, yet our staff
Sure.
visited the site. It's been there and permitted to be there since October.
Okay.
Not to speak negatively of staff, but I think without clear definition, we run into these roadblocks where it's left up to interpretation.
Sure.
And then it becomes a little bit challenging, right? Because people are doing very creative things with sea cans and shipping containers. So I think we should have discussion on, you know, if you cut a hole in the side and open it up, now it's a bar, right? And people are using them in very creative ways, not just as their intended use of storage. So I just think we should have some clear definition on that, and whether or not we're going to permit them and to what extent we will permit them. I thought I'd leave that with you because it's not the first time, but I had another call this morning about it and I was like,
Okay.
yeah, you know what, I'm gonna bring it up here
Yeah,
and
no,
leave it with staff and
Yeah, thank you.
might be worth defining in some way, shape or form. I did have another question, but I see that our delegate, I believe, has arrived, so I'm gonna leave the
Oh.
question. I was going to ask about public consultation where buildings are concerned. When we have an addition going on a house or somebody's building something and on their property and that building conforms to our bylaws, there would be no public consultation component to that. I'm correct in that?
Correct.
Is there any way to, or any benefit to exploring whether or not we should have a public consultation component when buildings are being erected that will notably impact surrounding neighborhoods or neighbors, even though they conform to the bylaws? For instance, if that neighborhood provides for building a 2-story home, but all of the other neighbors are bungalows. So that one individual decides that they're going to take the permits and they're going to build a legally conforming 2-story. That will have significant impact on the neighbors with sight lines and shadows and whatnot. So even though it conforms to the bylaws, it still has such an impact on the neighbors. Is there any benefit to exploring, like, and maybe it's up to staff discretion, but I'm not sure how to word that, but perhaps there's an opportunity just to do a little bit better with public consultation in that regard? Have we ever explored something like that, or is there
I don't know any municipality that does that. That would be through, it could be a responsibility of your building department, who when they get a building permit, because it will have no planning applications. That would be a building permit, and they would have to identify it and send out a notice. So I don't know any other municipality that does that. Not saying you couldn't do it. The question I would maybe have for the task force is, what would be gained by it? Because then you have a number of residents saying, do I have a say? And no, they don't have a say because it's a building permit. So
realizing it'd be almost impossible to do public consultation on every permit?
Well, and just to add to Paul's comment further, I think the challenges that we would have, just specifically, if it's not subject to a planning act application, as Paul mentioned, there is no public consultation component. And as per the applicable law to which a building permit is issued, regardless of a comment or a consultation that comes back, if it conforms and it meets the standards by which a building permit application is required, the CBO is required to issue that permit. So I think it just would sort of exacerbate the issue of you're providing a notice, they may be a concern, but under the law, CBO would be required to issue that building permit if it conforms.
Yep. Again, just bringing questions
Yeah.
from the public that I
Yeah.
thought. I'm gonna bring them forward.
So yeah,
Fair question.
that's the concern, is if
Yeah.
it's not subject to a planning act application, then there's no legal way to prevent the issuance of the permit.
I suppose leaving it up to staff discretion would create more obstacles in, everybody being treated fairly as well.
And I think too, Councilor Scully, I think one of the tools that we can identify is, as planners, is the tools that we have available. So the zoning bylaw, right? And making sure all those provisions, citywide are appropriate, right? And that they fit. And so, if we're talking about low rise areas, or we're talking about medium or high rise, making sure that those heights are appropriate and what we're talking about as a community and how we want to grow and all those things.
I have another question if
Go
I
ahead.
have time.
No,
Okay.
sure.
My next question is implementing. So we sat down, we had meetings, ward counselors, all of the suggestions that we gave for our ward, are those gonna be reflected
Yes,
in the new zoning bylaw, like all of them? Because we had a great conversation and
yeah, so I think that the conversations that, like the workshop sessions that we had, for sure, feedback and certain changes within wards was definitely understood and changes were made.
Okay.
I would say if, council's reviewing it over the course of July and August, and it was like, hey, this decision, where did we land on that? I don't see it reflected. Then we would certainly have that conversation, but
Okay.
for the most part, especially if there was dialogue and agreements in terms of, proposed changes, they should be reflected.
And is it possible to have like, almost like a, I don't even know how to word this question. So if I have a piece of land right now that's currently being used as, say, industrial.
Right.
Is there a way to implement that when that property ceases to be operating as manufacturing or industrial or whatever, that it automatically rezone to something else?
So it would be dependent on what it's zoned currently in the draft zoning bylaw. We would obviously look to the official plan, right? Our overarching document, what is the land use, that macro level guidance for land use into the future? Because that's what we're looking at first in our zoning bylaw. So if there's an industrial use existing right now,
Yeah,
the likelihood is probably zoned, either GE or PE, general employment or prestige employment. If it wasn't, then it would be legally non-conforming, right? And so,
the reason I'm asking,
yeah,
Ward 1 has a severe deficit of commercial amenities.
right,
there.
right.
So what I'm trying to do through this process, perhaps, if we can, is identify parcels of land that, should they stop operating under its current form, like
Right.
a factory or there's a piece of land, whatever, but it's something like that, that it automatically convert to, say, commercial as opposed to more houses. Do you know what I mean?
Right, right.
And I know
right.
we do have some control over that in our planning, through our planning process, but I was just wondering if there was a way to implement a change and allow them to operate as grandfathered in, but that when that operation ceases, it converts to something else.
The
through
way
this
you'd have to do it.
Yeah.
is it'd have to be designated in your official plan for the commercial.
Mhm.
And then it would be zoned for commercial. The industrial can keep operating because it'll be a legal non-conforming use.
Mhm.
As soon as somebody stops using it for industrial, it can no longer be used for that industrial. It'll be used for commercial.
Yeah.
But you'd have to have that provisions in the official plan and zoning for that commercial use.
Yes.
So I have to, gotcha,
So it starts with the official plan, but if there are properties that are designated and zoned that, you could do that.
And if they're not, that's when it would be a lot more challenging, right? Because you're gonna be down zoning somebody's property who might be continuing to use it as industrial. So often those conversations with the landowners would have to be a conversation piece and then the
Yeah.
whole planning process as well.
okay, so nothing through this process, it's an official plan amendment, perfect.
There
That's it
are
for me.
though, there are some old industrial properties that we have designated for another use and zoned for another use, so. There's some that will become legal non-conforming, and when they stop, they'll have to change to another use.
Perfect.
Quite a few of them. Councilor Caputo.
Wow, I almost forgot what I was gonna ask. So actually, a couple of questions. Actually, one of them came up today. It was a couple of residents had some concerns, and I actually reached out to our actual bylaw department. But it's just interesting to see how we would go about this. From a commercial, a retail store or commercial spot, is it possible for retailers to keep an empty trailer utilized in their loading zones as part of their like on an ongoing basis? Almost the only reason I came up is because I kind of thought about what Councilor Sicoli was just talking about, sea containers in someone's backyard, and we're talking about 30 days. But if I was going to put something into the city and then a city plan and say I wanted 30,000 square feet of retail space, and then decided that all I'll do is park a couple of trailers in my back, that's still residential visual. How do we handle that, or what's the situation there? Because it certainly stumped our bylaw director. I'm not quite sure how to You know, I mean, they are eyesores. I drove past 3 of them this afternoon and they're just sitting out there and it's just real world. That's a lot of square footage that somebody's not either A, paying rent on, B, paying taxes on, and C, is certainly not part of the of what was designed for that particular spot.
Question is just more around time.
You know, I'm gonna take a shot at it before staff do, I think very clearly that if it's a commercial property and it's zoned commercial, it would have to have outside storage as part of that zoning for them to have outside storage on the property. If they don't have that, they can't have outside storage, but if they do have that, they can have outside storage. Secondly, they can't be storing a trailer permanently in a loading space because part of the requirement for getting the zoning for the commercial property was to have a proper loading space designated and designed and approved through our engineering department for proper turning radius. So staff will correct me if I'm out of line here.
No, great summary, great summary. I think you're right in terms of what's permitted. You know, a maximum in the proposed zoning bylaw, a maximum of 4 shipping containers shall be permitted. But through the chair, I think where, you know, we start to talk about the location, right? And so we're talking about not in the required parking or loading areas, a certain distance from, you know, landscape buffers. So there is certain requirements for where they can be located. And, you know, I think when we're talking about the location of interior side yards or rear yards, it's going to change where they can be located in the configuration for the exact point of, you know, not impeding how the site functions or maybe even how it's visually presented from the street.
Okay, because these particular businesses are all visual from the street. They are in their loading areas. So
So under the new zoning bylaw, that wouldn't advance. That would be, you know, a bylaw infraction that would need to be addressed.
okay, so that's perfect. And one more question. So we've got height restrictions. Can we just refresh my memory? I was going through the wonderful book that I still have here, so I actually did come somewhat prepared for this today. When we looked at height restrictions in Brantford Station, so North Ward, if I'm correct, I thought there was a restriction of 6 stories in that area, although there is an 8-story building. Am I right or wrong? If I say Richmond Street?
Sorry, Phil.
Because it's off of downtown. And the only reason I'm asking is because there's a potential development that might want to happen there that actually is 11 stories. And I wasn't sure that actually was part of what we had agreed upon for the height restriction in that area.
I think in that area, most of
Oh, have
the
it.
property is designated as
NLR.
NLR, which is a 3-story maximum. There may be some properties within that district that would go up to a mid-rise, which is up to 6. So I don't believe there's anything there that would accommodate higher than that, but it would depend on whether or not it can meet the criteria established in the official plan for where a more high-rise building in excess of 6 stories could go. So
Yeah.
without knowing the specifics, I can't really say whether that would be permitted or not, 11 stories.
Yeah, and so through the chair and to kind of echo Alan's comments, I think it would be dependent on if we were looking at the proposed zoning, whether it is NLR. There are a few areas or a few properties within the North Ward that are identified as residential mid-rise. You know, and we did get feedback during the zoning bylaw process, but a lot of those would need to advance through the planning process because, you know, they might need an official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the height. So with the exception of a few, it's neighborhood low rise.
Okay, thank you.
But to Gino's point, the property in question that he's talking about, just if it's designated as 3 to 4 stories, or even 6, can he make sure he's clear about what would be required if you wanted to change that from 6 to 11? Because when we're finally finished here, is there a freeze for zoning applications for a year, those kind of things, whatever the criteria or the problematic, whatever needs to be done, so he's aware of it, so he can talk to his constituents about it. Joe?
Chairman, just before Paul or Josh speak to this, I maybe relieve the counselor online here a little bit that those developers have heard yourselves as well as the residents of that area, and I think I know exactly which property you're referring to with respect to the open house. They have since come back and revisited that application or that submission to go with a stacked product and no apartments higher than 3 stories.
Okay,
So, if that at all pleases, that's
Yeah,
definitely what we're hearing here as staff from those developers, that they are no longer pursuing 6 or 10-story proposal that they had heard with the public with.
okay, perfect. Well, it's Robert Moore Park who I was referring to, so that's the one. So I think we were on that call together just on point, so.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
we're done the question period of any member of council committee. But before we do that, I don't want to move to pass this because we missed a delegation who was just running a little late, and I don't want to exclude her. So I think as Brigitte Pavic is here as delegate, so I have to read you the rules, Brigitte, before you come forward, okay? As a rule. No person must display any sign, banner, placard, in the meeting room other than materials that, in the opinion of the chair, are legitimate audio visual aids necessary in connection with any presentation made to this committee. All persons present shall use polite, respectful language and shall refrain from using any language or the making of any gestures in a disrespectful or offensive manner. All persons addressing the committee shall speak only on the subject in the debate and shall not speak on any other subject. We're pretty flexible there. No person shall applaud this debate. So please come forward and we'll give you up to 10 minutes. To speak.
Wow.
And questions for the committee as well.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I was late.
That's okay. They have-
I had to like drive around, find
Sometimes you find
parking,
your
because
way
it was
in
all
here,
30
not
minute
easy.
and I didn't know. And are Rob and Josh here? You're Rob,
I'm Josh.
you're Josh. So we've spoken.
Yes, we've
and-
spoken.
And Rob's not here.
Rob is not here. No.
Okay, so Ms. Sicoli, Rose Foley had started to address part of it. And Josh is well aware, so is Rob, he's not here. So what's going on and what brought my attention is a neighbor very vaguely said we're gonna be doing an addition. And I only found out when the contractor got the permit, how big the addition is going to be. And so if you would allow me, I can show you visually, like it's my senior parents who've moved from Mississauga, who had a beautiful property there, came to Brantford, quieter, want more green. Now they're going to be sandwiched, not just the sidewalls, but the back. And yes, my parents still have their yard. So if you picture this as their property, here's their house, here's the yard. And then the neighbor, because there's a corner property here. And then on Tuxedo, there's like a 2-bedroom house here. And so that's where they're doing the addition. So their sideline meets with our rear line. And they're well within their rights, like conforms to the zoning bylaws. So they're allowed to come up to 1.2 meters to the fence here. And then we thought it was just gonna be a 1-story. It's gonna be an added story on the back end of their house. And the contractor tried to downplay it. When I asked him, they wanted access through our property to be able to bring the bobcats in. The corner neighbor's like, I don't want bobcats coming in here, so I'm kind of speaking for the corner neighbor as well. And I asked him yesterday and the day before, do you have any questions you want me to bring forth? He's like, no, I trust you. So anyway, once I found out more of what was going on, we had to, like, my parents were upset, like, no, we don't want all that going on in our property. They told us it was gonna be 3-4 weeks. The city's like, that's probably gonna take a good 6 months. So he had downplayed and said it was only gonna be like 3 feet of access, but he actually needed access all the way to here, to the end of my parents' property. So now there's gonna be a whole 2 stories here. My senior mom, who's 77, soon to be 78, and this probably may apply to other people. I've worked for the city, I've spoken in a lot of situations, so I'm not uncomfortable speaking and bringing things forth, and as we all know, one squeaky wheel is probably speaking for at least 10 others. So wherever you guys have a corner situation in the city, there may be people who may be upset, but couldn't be bothered, don't have the wherewithal to come and speak forth about this. So the question Rose had put forth was coming from me. Because I think, I get it, you can't consult the whole public, but when a situation like this happens, you can at least consult. Probably in general, it would be one property that's going to be affected. Maybe maximum 3. I don't know how the people over here are affected or the people over here. So that, I think, is not too much for citizenry to request to be included because there's going to be a big impact. Now, my mom's not gonna see anything but like a big wall on all sides. That is not why we came to Brantford. And so there's not much we can do, I guess, at this point, because the building permit's been approved. And my parents are too old to be moving like just like that.
So what are you looking for in your comments? Are you looking?
So
for-
I'm looking for that when a situation like that happens, because I understand that the rear setbacks are 7.5 meters. So yeah, my parents' property is 7.5 meters setback. Normally, that would be a rear yard there, but because the property shares a sideline, then it's like, so it's no longer their, it's not their rear line, it's
Okay.
their sideline, so they get to be close. So I don't know what situations you all live in, but imagine instead of somebody else's backyard behind you, it's a building right at smack up against your fence.
Yeah, just trying to look for.
So it affects sight lines, it obstructs view. Like, we're not gonna see anything but wall, we're not gonna see sky or trees, because it's gonna be tall. We expect that on the sides, but you don't expect it in the back.
Right.
I've lived most of my life in Toronto, and I've been fortunate even in Toronto, that all the yards where I lived faced another backyard, maybe a little shed. But definitely not, like, these guys are expanding. I don't wanna like be a difficult neighbor. I don't wanna do that at all, and my parents definitely don't. They'd probably be upset knowing I'm here, because I'm speaking up on their behalf and other people. So they're gonna be staring at a wall. I don't know, maybe something like could be done in effect where, like, there's no trees in between it. They were gonna remove all the landscaping without any like forward plan on like what they would have done with it. We don't have fancy landscaping, but still.
Okay, we got, I'll see if any members of the committee have any questions. Any members of the committee have any questions of the delegation? Okay.
Yeah.
Rose?
I don't have a question, but I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, and it's certainly going to spur some conversation, I think, internally and amongst us. And I just want to thank you for bringing it forward and helping to make improvements in our processes internally. We don't know what we don't know, so thank you for taking that time, and we're going to have some conversation and see what we can do. Might not help you right now with this situation, or your parents, I should say, but it's definitely started a conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, because
Thank you.
just to add, like, it's a nice neighborhood and it's gonna create cluttering, and I thought there was a 35% allowance for building on a property. It looks like their new building, it's gonna take up 80 to 90% of the actual property. So I'm wondering how that variance was allowed, and if that continues, you're gonna have a level of density in an area that didn't have it before. Was that considered? Thanks for listening.
So just in an area where I could see what might think about this, is she had talked about a side yard. So in a side yard abuts a backyard. We have some criteria for that.
Yeah, so through the chair, I'll let Paul speak to it, and I apologize for Ethan when we were speaking over, because Paul was highlighting a few sections of the new zoning bylaw. So the building permit that, you know, was issued for the property that you're speaking to, it certainly conforms with 160-90, lot coverage, setbacks, rear yard, side yard, interior. But in the new zoning bylaw, Paul had just highlighted while you were speaking, actually, one provision that in the future might give some additional opportunity for review. So Paul, what did you say?
Sure, yeah, it's in the neighborhood low-rise section, so what we've seen in other municipalities where you have infill like this, you have smaller houses and they're infilling, they're going deeper, much deeper than other houses, could be a side yard, or it could be, you know, they're parallel lots. But that creates an impact where they go further in the backyard because they may have a very deep yard, and so 7.5 meters may be way back in the lot. So what we've done in other municipalities and we proposed in this bylaw is limiting the depth of the dwelling in these infill situations. So you don't have those dwellings going very far into in the backyard compared to other dwellings. So that's a provision we've added. Unfortunately, it's in the new bylaw and it doesn't help the current situation.
It will help going
It
forward.
will help going forward.
Thank you for that. Okay, now I need a mover to move item 4.1, moved by Rose Foley, seconded by, Caputo. All those in favor? Carried, thank you. Consent items is the 6.1, the zoning bylaw minutes. Can I get a mover for that? Councilor Foley? Councilor Caputo, any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, call the question, all in favor? There are no resolutions to today's meeting. No other notice of motion for today's meeting, so the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.